Somewhere in the back of America's kitchens, tucked between faded cookbooks and handwritten cards, there are recipes that once meant everything, and now, almost no one remembers them. These were the meals that filled dinner tables, stretched tight budgets, and carried families through ordinary days that quietly became history. But over time, taste changed, shortcuts replaced tradition, and these dishes slowly disappeared without anyone noticing. Today, we're opening that forgotten chapter again, because hidden inside these lost Betty Crocker recipes are stories of comfort, survival, and a way of cooking that refused to be forgotten. Until now. Tomato aspic. Long before colorful salads came from plastic tubs at grocery stores, there was a dish that shimmered on dinner tables like something almost too strange to eat. Tomato aspic. At first glance, it looked like a jewel, bright red, perfectly molded, and trembling slightly under the light. But this wasn't dessert. This was dinner. Popular throughout the 1940s and 1950s, tomato aspic was a staple in American households, especially during gatherings, church suppers, and holiday meals. It was made by combining tomato juice with gelatin, then carefully seasoned with vinegar, celery, and spices. Sometimes, small bits of vegetables were suspended inside, frozen in place like tiny moments captured in time. Once chilled, it would be sliced and served cold, often alongside lettuce or even a scoop of mayonnaise. To modernize, it feels unusual, almost confusing. A savory jelly? The texture alone is enough to make people hesitate. But back then, it represented something very different. It was elegant, affordable, and incredibly practical. Refrigeration was becoming more common, and gelatin dishes showed off a new kind of kitchen skill. It was a way for home cooks to turn simple ingredients into something that looked refined and impressive. So why did it disappear? As taste shifted toward fresher, simpler foods, dishes like tomato aspic began to feel outdated. The rise of convenience foods and changing ideas about texture pushed it quietly off the table. What once felt modern and sophisticated slowly became a curiosity, something people remembered but no longer made. And yet, in its quiet way, tomato aspic still tells a story of a time when presentation mattered, when creativity lived inside limitation, and when even the simplest ingredients could be transformed into something unforgettable. Mock apple pie. There was something unsettling about the first bite. It looked like apple pie, smelled like apple pie, even tasted like apple pie, but there were no apples inside. This was mock apple pie, a dessert built on illusion, born in a time when ingredients weren't always guaranteed. Made famous in mid-20th century American kitchens, especially during and after the Great Depression, this pie used buttery crackers instead of fruit. Crushed crackers were simmered with sugar, water, lemon juice, and cinnamon, creating a filling that somehow mimicked the texture and flavor of cooked apples. Poured into a pie crust and baked until golden, it emerged from the oven looking almost identical to the real thing. For families facing shortages, this wasn't just clever, it was necessary. Apples could be expensive or unavailable depending on the season, but crackers were cheap, shelf-stable, and easy to store. This recipe became a quiet solution, passed between neighbors and printed in trusted cookbooks. It was proof that even in times of uncertainty, something warm and familiar could still be placed on the table. But there was always a strange truth behind it. Everyone knew it wasn't really apple pie. It was a substitute, a stand-in for something missing. And as years passed, that feeling began to matter more. Once grocery stores became fully stocked again and fresh produce was always within reach, the need for imitation disappeared. Slowly, mock apple pie faded away. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well at pretending. People no longer wanted replacements. They wanted the real thing. Still, this recipe lingers like a quiet memory. A reminder of a time when creativity wasn't optional, and when even a simple cracker could become something almost magical. Ham and banana hollandaise. There was a time when dinner tables held combinations that would feel almost unbelievable today. One of the strangest and most forgotten was ham and banana hollandaise. At first, it sounds like a mistake. Sweet fruit, salty meat, and a rich, buttery sauce, all placed together on the same plate. But decades ago, this dish was served with pride. Popular in the 1950s and 1960s, this recipe reflected a growing fascination with exotic flavors and bold presentation. Bananas, once considered a luxury item, became more widely available, and home cooks were eager to experiment. The dish was simple in structure. Ripe bananas were wrapped in slices of ham, baked until warm, then covered in a smooth hollandaise sauce. Sometimes a touch of mustard or cheese was added for extra flavor. To modern tastes, it feels confusing. The sweetness of the banana clashes with the saltiness of the ham, while the rich sauce ties everything together in a way that's hard to place. But at the time, this contrast was the appeal. It felt sophisticated, different, and just adventurous enough to impress guests without being complicated. This dish also revealed something deeper about the era. Post-war America was stepping into a new world of convenience and abundance. Ingredients that once felt rare were now accessible, and cookbooks encouraged creativity over tradition. Meals became a way to show curiosity, not just comfort. So why did it vanish? As food culture shifted toward authenticity and cleaner flavors, combinations like this began to feel forced. What once seemed elegant started to feel artificial. The novelty wore off, and the dish quietly disappeared from tables. Yet in its unusual pairing, ham and banana hollandaise tells a story of experimentation. A moment when the kitchen became a place of risk, where not every idea lasted, but each one reflected a changing world. Perfection salad. There was something almost too precise about it. Suspended in a clear, shimmering mold sat tiny cubes of cabbage, carrots, and peppers, perfectly arranged, as if time itself had been frozen. They called it perfection salad, and for a while, it truly lived up to that name. Emerging in the early 20th century and rising to peak popularity by the 1940s and 1950s, perfection salad was more than just a side dish. It was a statement. Made by combining shredded vegetables with a lightly sweetened vinegar dressing, then set in gelatin, it transformed simple ingredients into something structured and elegant. Once chilled, it would be sliced cleanly, each piece holding its shape with almost unnatural precision. To modernize, it feels distant. Vegetables trapped inside gelatin don't quite match today's idea of freshness. But back then, this dish represented control, order, and refinement. In an era where presentation mattered deeply, perfection salad showed that a home cook could create something that looked as polished as anything served at a formal gathering. It also carried a quiet practicality. Ingredients were inexpensive, and the dish could be made ahead of time, stored, and served without last-minute effort. It fit perfectly into a world where hosting meant planning, and every detail mattered. So why did it disappear? As food trends moved toward natural textures and less processed forms, gelatin-based dishes began to feel artificial. What once symbolized elegance started to seem rigid and outdated. The name perfection itself became a reminder of a standard that no longer felt relevant. Still, there's something haunting about it. A dish so carefully arranged, so deliberately preserved, yet unable to survive the passing of time. Perfection salad remains as a quiet echo of an era that believed beauty could be molded, held, and served in perfect slices. Chicken divan. It began as something elegant. Soft light in a formal dining room, the quiet clink of silverware, and a dish placed carefully at the center of the table. Chicken divan. It wasn't just food. It was presentation, status, and comfort layered into one. Originally created in the early 20th century and later popularized in American homes during the 1950s and 1960s, chicken divan combined tender chicken with broccoli, all covered in a rich, creamy sauce. Often made with condensed soup, mayonnaise, or cheese, it was baked until bubbling, sometimes topped with breadcrumbs for a delicate crunch. Served hot, it carried a warmth that felt both luxurious and familiar. At the time, this dish represented a shift. Home cooking was evolving, blending restaurant-inspired meals with everyday convenience. Ingredients that once belonged to professional kitchens were now simplified for families. Chicken divan became a symbol of that transition, something that felt upscale, yet was easy enough to prepare at home. But beneath its creamy surface was a deeper story. This was the era of casseroles, meals designed to feed families efficiently, stretch ingredients, and create something filling without waste. It wasn't just about taste. It was about practicality disguised as indulgence. So why did it fade? As food culture moved toward lighter, fresher meals, heavy cream-based casseroles began to lose their place. What once felt rich and satisfying started to feel excessive. New generations looked for cleaner flavors, and dishes like chicken divan quietly stepped aside. Yet, there's a certain stillness in remembering it. A reminder of evenings when meals were baked slowly, when the oven warmed the entire house, and when something simple could feel unexpectedly refined. Chicken divan may have disappeared from most tables, but its story still lingers, somewhere between comfort and elegance, waiting to be remembered. Salmon loaf. There was a time when the smell of dinner drifting through the house carried a quiet kind of certainty. Not excitement, not surprise, just something familiar, something expected. And often, that something was salmon loaf. It didn't look like much. A simple, firm slice placed on a plate, sometimes with a pale sauce poured gently over the top. But behind its plain appearance was a recipe built on necessity and resourcefulness. Made from canned salmon, breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasoning, the mixture was shaped into a loaf and baked until set. It was affordable, filling, and easy to prepare, exactly what many families needed. Salmon loaf became especially common in the 1930s through the 1950s, when canned goods were a staple in American kitchens. Fresh fish wasn't always accessible, but canned salmon could sit on a shelf for months, waiting for the right moment. It offered protein, flavor, and a sense of reliability during uncertain times. And yet, there was always something slightly restrained about it. The texture was dense, the flavor mild, often softened further by sauces meant to make it more appealing. It wasn't a dish people talked about with excitement. It was one they simply understood. So why did it disappear? As access to fresh ingredients improved and food culture shifted toward brighter, fresher flavors, dishes like salmon loaf began to feel too plain, too heavy, too tied to an earlier way of living. People moved away from meals that felt like survival and toward ones that felt like choice. Still, salmon loaf holds a quiet place in memory. It speaks of evenings without excess, of kitchens where nothing was wasted, and of a time when even the simplest meal carried its own kind of meaning. Vinegar pie. It sounded impossible at first, like something born from a mistake rather than a recipe. Vinegar pie. No fruit, no cream, no chocolate, just vinegar, sugar, and a few simple pantry staples turned into something surprisingly close to dessert. This pie dates back to a time when kitchens had to rely on what was already on the shelf. During the late 19th century and into the Great Depression, fresh fruit wasn't always available, especially in rural households. So cooks improvised. They combined vinegar with sugar, butter, and eggs, sometimes thickening it with flour or cornstarch, creating a filling that mimicked the tartness of lemon pie. Poured into a crust and baked, it set into a soft, custard-like slice with a sharp sweetness hidden beneath its surface. At first bite, it confused people. The flavor didn't match expectation. It wasn't rich, it wasn't fruity, but it had a strange brightness that lingered. For many families, it wasn't about perfection. It was about possibility, turning something harsh and simple into something that could still be called dessert. Vinegar pie became a quiet symbol of resilience. It appeared in handwritten recipe books, passed down through generations who understood that scarcity demanded creativity. Every ingredient had a purpose, and nothing was wasted, not even something as unexpected as vinegar. But as time moved forward, it slowly disappeared. Once fresh lemons, berries, and other fruits became widely available, there was no longer a need to imitate their flavor. The idea of vinegar in a dessert felt outdated, even strange. Yet vinegar pie remains a reminder of how far kitchens have come. A time when sweetness wasn't always found in abundance, but carefully created from whatever was left behind. Tunnel of fudge cake. There was a moment when this cake changed everything. One slice, one fork pull, and suddenly the center collapsed into something unexpected. A thick, molten tunnel of chocolate hidden inside a firm, crumbly crust. It was called Tunnel of Fudge Cake, and for a short time, it became a sensation. It first gained attention in the late 1960s after appearing in a baking contest sponsored by a well-known American cookbook tradition. What made it so famous wasn't just the flavor, it was the texture. The outside looked like a simple bundt cake, but the inside held a dense, almost under-baked ribbon of fudgy chocolate that refused to fully set. At the time, home bakers were fascinated. It felt like a mistake that turned into magic. The recipe spread quickly across kitchens, magazines, and handwritten copies passed between friends. But there was a catch. Precision mattered. Too much baking, and the tunnel disappeared. Too little, and the cake collapsed entirely. It walked a fine line between success and failure. And that's exactly what made it so memorable. Over time, though, it began to fade. Modern baking trends shifted toward consistency and control. People wanted predictable results, clean slices, and reliable textures. The uncertainty that once made Tunnel of Fudge Cake exciting slowly became a frustration instead of a charm. Eventually, simpler chocolate desserts took its place. Fudge brownies, molten cakes, and ready-made mixes that guaranteed the same result every time. But those who remember it still talk about that first slice. The moment the knife broke through the top, and something rich and hidden slowly revealed itself inside. Tunnel of Fudge Cake wasn't just dessert. It was a surprise baked into history, waiting for the right moment to appear. 7-layer salad. At first glance, it looked like something frozen in time. A glass bowl holding perfect, separate layers, crisp lettuce at the bottom, followed by rows of peas, onions, celery, cheese, and a final smooth blanket of mayonnaise spread carefully across the top like a seal. This was 7-layer salad, a dish that once defined potlucks across America. It became especially popular in the 1950s and 1960s, when community gatherings were a central part of social life. Church suppers, family reunions, holiday tables, this salad appeared everywhere. Its appeal wasn't just taste, but structure. Each layer was distinct, carefully arranged so that when served, the spoon would cut through history in a single scoop. What made it so practical was also what made it so admired. It could be prepared hours ahead of time, even the night before. The layers stayed separate, preserving both texture and presentation. For busy homemakers, it was a reliable centerpiece that looked impressive without last-minute effort. And yet, beneath its polished surface was a quiet shift in food culture. This was the era of convenience, when canned peas, packaged cheese, and bottled mayonnaise began reshaping American kitchens. 7-layer salad reflected that transformation. It was colorful, abundant, and structured in a way that felt modern at the time. But as decades passed, tastes changed. Fresh salads replaced layered ones. People began to prefer lighter dressings, mixed textures, and simpler presentations. The carefully separated structure started to feel heavy, even outdated. Still, there's something unforgettable about it. The moment the spoon breaks through those clean layers, revealing everything at once. It wasn't just a salad. It was a snapshot of a time when presentation mattered as much as flavor, and when even a simple bowl could carry the weight of a gathering. Impossible pie. It didn't make sense at first. No crust to roll, no layers to build, no complicated steps to follow. Yet somehow, it baked itself into a pie. They called it impossible pie, and for many home cooks, it felt like kitchen magic disguised as simplicity. This recipe rose to popularity in the 1970s, when convenience baking was becoming a defining part of American kitchens. The idea was almost unbelievable. You mix all the ingredients, milk, eggs, sugar, flour, butter, and flavoring, pour into a dish and bake. During baking, the mixture separated on its own. A soft crust formed at the bottom, a creamy custard settled in the middle, and a light, cake-like layer rose to the top. No steps, no layers, just transformation happening inside the oven. For busy households, impossible pie was more than just a recipe. It was relief. It removed pressure from baking while still delivering something warm and homemade. It became popular through community cookbooks, box mix promotions, and word of mouth, spreading quickly because it felt almost too easy to be real. But over time, it quietly faded. As baking culture shifted towards scratch-made desserts and more controlled techniques, recipes that relied on kitchen chemistry lost their spotlight. People wanted precision, not surprise. They wanted results they could predict. And yet, impossible pie still carries a quiet wonder. That moment when you slice into it and realize it became three textures on its own without being told how. It feels less like following a recipe and more like watching something create itself. It remains one of those forgotten ideas from the past. Simple, strange, and just a little unbelievable, like a small piece of kitchen history that still refuses to be fully explained. From faded recipe cards to forgotten family tables, these dishes are more than just food. They are echoes of a different time. Each one tells a story of creativity, survival, and changing tastes across American history. Some were born from scarcity, others from curiosity, but all of them slowly disappeared as the world moved on. Yet in every strange ingredient and unexpected combination, there's a reminder of how people once cooked, lived, and adapted. If you enjoyed uncovering these forgotten Betty Crocker recipes, make sure to subscribe because there are many more lost stories waiting to be brought back into the light.